Have you ever pondered how financial management can be approached from a Christian perspective? It's a thought that has perhaps crossed your mind, but have you ever truly dived into the implications of such a perspective? To begin with, let's set the stage with a fundamental concept. As Christians, we are stewards of God's resources. This is not just a symbolic statement, it's a practical, day-to-day responsibility that we bear. Our spending decisions should not be guided solely by our personal desires or societal pressures, but should align with our values and what we believe God would have us do with our money. The Bible provides us with a wealth of wisdom on this subject. For example, in Proverbs 3:9, it states, "Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops." This verse encourages us to give the first and best part of our income back to God, acknowledging that everything we have comes from Him. In Matthew 6:21, we find another powerful insight. "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." This verse reminds us that our spending habits reflect what we truly value. If we spend our money on things that glorify God and serve others, it shows that our hearts are in the right place. However, understanding these biblical principles is only the first step. It's essential that we also learn how to apply them in a practical sense. This means creating a budget, cutting back on unnecessary expenses, and staying motivated towards financial freedom. It means avoiding debt, saving for the future, and above all, being generous with our resources. The dangers of debt and the importance of saving for emergencies and long-term goals are not just financial advice, they are biblical wisdom. By following these principles, we are not only managing our money wisely, but also honoring God with our finances. As we've seen, the Bible provides us with a clear guideline on how to handle our finances. But how does this translate into real-life scenarios? Consider the story of John and Sarah, a Christian couple who worked diligently to align their financial habits with their faith. John and Sarah are just like any other couple, with bills to pay and dreams to fulfill, but they decided to approach their finances differently. They believed in the biblical principle that they are stewards of God's resources, and they wanted their financial decisions to reflect this. They started by creating a budget. They understood the wisdom of the verse in Proverbs 27:23, which says, "Be sure you know the condition of your flocks, give careful attention to your herds." In the same way, they gave careful attention to their income and expenses. They prioritized necessities over wants, ensuring they lived within their means. As they streamlined their spending, they also found ways to cut back on unnecessary expenses. They were inspired by the verse in Proverbs 21:20. "The wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down." So they chose to be wise, avoiding impulsive purchases and instead setting aside money for the future. John and Sarah also made it a point to pay off their debt. They were mindful of Proverbs 22:7. "The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender." Determined not to be slaves to their debt, they worked overtime, made sacrifices, and gradually paid off what they owed. But even as they worked towards financial freedom, they never forgot the importance of generosity. They were moved by the verse in Luke 6:38, "Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together and running over will be poured into your lap." So they gave. They gave to their church, to charities, and to those in need, trusting that God would bless their generosity. John and Sarah's story is just one of many, but it shows us that it's possible to manage our finances successfully while staying true to our Christian values. You might be wondering, how can I manage my finances like John and Sarah? Well, let's dive right into some practical tips for Christian money management. First and foremost, it's important to create a budget. This is more than just a financial tool. It's a roadmap for your spending. The Bible puts it this way in Proverbs 21:20. "In the house of the wise are stores of choice food and oil, but a foolish man devours all he has." Having a budget helps you avoid being that foolish man who spends all he has. Secondly, strive to spend less than you earn. This might seem obvious, but it's a principle many struggle with. It's about living within your means and resisting the urge to keep up with the Joneses. The third tip is to avoid debt as much as possible. Proverbs 22:7 tells us, "The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender." Debt can easily become a heavy burden, robbing us of our peace and freedom. Fourthly, save for the future. This is not about hoarding wealth, but about being prepared for unexpected expenses and long-term goals. Remember the ant in Proverbs 6, 6:8, who gathers her food at harvest. Lastly, but certainly not least, be generous. 2 Corinthians 9:7 tells us, each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Being generous is a reflection of God's generosity towards us. These tips are not just about managing money, they're about aligning our financial decisions with our Christian values. Remember, as Christians, we are stewards of God's resources. Following these tips won't just improve your financial health, it'll also bring you closer to God by allowing you to be a better steward of His resources. So what have we learned about Christian money management today? Well, we've unearthed a wealth of wisdom. We started by exploring the Christian perspective on money, understanding that it's not just about accumulating wealth, but being good stewards of the resources God has given us. We then journeyed through the real-life example of John and Sarah, seeing how they applied biblical principles to their financial management. Their story gave us a tangible example of how to balance saving, spending, and giving in a way that aligns with our Christian values. Then we delved into practical tips for Christian financial management. We discovered the importance of budgeting, the need for saving, the call to avoid debt, and the blessing of generosity. These aren't just smart financial habits. They're acts of faithfulness that reflect our commitment to God. As we wrap up, let's remember this important truth. Managing money from a Christian perspective isn't just about achieving financial freedom. It's about aligning our financial decisions with our faith and becoming better stewards of God's resources. May God guide us in our financial journeys.